Worked out. So listen, thank you, Ro, for taking the time here. And thanks to our subscribers for joining as people are coming back in. Just a heads up, Ro is dressed like a congressperson. I am dressed in Denver Nuggets gear because the Nuggets game one starts
You think Denver
tomorrow.
in 5 or 6, David? That's the key question.
I was very proud that the Nuggets defeated the team that your area team could not defeat. We defeated the Lakers. So that was.
You got so much height. It's just like that. That's all it comes down to. You're just taller than the other team.
Yeah, it was extremely exciting, and we really need it here because for those who don't know, the Denver Nuggets have never even been to the championship in, I think, more than or roughly 50 years of existing as a team. So it's very exciting for us out
it's
here.
It's like the type of sport trivia you would know that.
Never even have been. And Senator Chris Murphy, who we had on our podcast, everyone listening should go listen to our podcast at levertimepod.com. Senator Chris Murphy busted on me a little bit, said that he knew I was a Sixers fan because I grew up in Philly, and that he accused me of just jumping on the Denver bandwagon. So I guess I'll accept that charge. I am on the Denver bandwagon. You were a Sixers fan too, weren't you?
I was a Sixers fan. My wife says never trust a man who changes his sports allegiances, which I did. To the 49ers and the Warriors.
Yeah, that's fair. Anyway, all right, let's talk about the debt ceiling vote. I mean, the vote, just to update everybody, the vote on the debt ceiling bill is tonight. Is that right? In a number of minutes or hours, right?
Yeah. In fact, we're talking probably an hour before it.
Okay, great. So this is happening. It's been in the news a lot. I think a lot of folks know the broad strokes, don't necessarily know the details. So why don't we start there? Why don't you tell us what is this bill? What would it do? What is the criticism? And why are you voting against it?
Sure. Well, we have this artificial thing called a debt ceiling in this country. And that says that basically it's an arbitrary number and that the Congress says that the United States government can't exceed that level of debt. Now, past Congresses have already told the president, you've got to go spend X amount of money. And the president is constitutionally obligated to spend that money. Turns out, though, for him to spend all of that money, he would go over this debt ceiling. And so if we did not raise the debt ceiling, then the country could technically be in default. The president just could stop paying obligations that the Congress ordered him to pay. Many of us in Congress have been saying, well, just pay the debts. The 14th Amendment requires you, obligates you to pay the debts. You can say you were obligated by Congress to pay the bad debts. Let the Republicans sue you in court. By the way, the Supreme Court, even a John Roberts, probably is not going to want the world economy to collapse. They probably will uphold the decision to pay the debts, especially because they know you can just continue to pay the debts regardless of what the court says in some sense. I mean, you can just say this is your interpretation of the Constitution. The president didn't want to go down that path. Many senators, congresspeople urged him to do that. David, you've been calling, and some of us have been calling for the president to have resolved this in the lame duck session, having raised the debt ceiling back then. He didn't do that. So he was stuck in this position where he had to negotiate with the Republicans. And I've been public. I said, okay, given those circumstances, that he didn't do either option one, just paying the debts, or option two, raising the debt ceiling in the lame duck, given that he chose he had to negotiate with the Republicans, we got a deal that wasn't terrible, but it's still a center-right deal. Now people say, well, you're a progressive, you're mischaracterizing this as a center-right deal. Here's why it's a center-right deal. It's a center-right deal because defense spending goes up and social spending goes down. I don't know how you could characterize that as anything but center-right. The whole point of mainstream Democrats are there's got to be a parity between defense and social spending. So it's a center-right deal. Now, it's a center-right deal that is not a crazy deal, and that's much better than all of the horrific things that McCarthy had in it. And if this was your only option, I understand why you had to do that, because you don't want the economy to default. So what some of us have said is, okay, we're sympathetic, we understand what the president was doing, but it's still a center-right deal, and we can't vote for something that's going to cut food stamps when you have an affordability crisis, that's going to cut, by the way, the 50 to 54-year-olds that are affected, disproportionately Black women, disproportionately women of color. These are folks who probably have some health issue, been out of the workforce, want to get back to work, and you're taking the $6 of food stamps away from them, or they're taking care of their elderly mom or their elderly dad or their kids, and you're taking away their food. And they're non-custodial parents because the law may not see them as parents, but they're taking care of a child. And then you're punishing young people for drowning in student debt, and you're saying, we're going to stop the pause on your repaying these loans while you can't afford food, while you can't afford a place to live. And the most obnoxious is basically you're green lighting the Mountain View pipeline, which is a just sop to the fossil fuel industry and infrastructure while we're championing the climate agenda. So we said, look, we're going to vote no. I did, and now quite a few progressives have.
So I want to ask the question about why this wasn't done in the past, and what you say to folks who look at that and feel really cynical. And there's one way to look at this, which is that Bernie Sanders, even Janet Yellen, said it would be a good idea to raise the debt ceiling in the lame duck session of Congress when Democrats controlled both houses of Congress, and they could have done it through reconciliation. And then a little while after that, Dick Durbin came out and said, well, we just don't have time to do that. We're just not going to make time on the calendar to do that. And people put that together with the fact that Joe Biden has, in the previous iteration of Joe Biden, many years ago, said that he supports working with Republicans to freeze federal spending, do kind of austerity that we're talking about here. And if you put that together, some might conclude that this is exactly what the Biden administration wanted, that these are the conditions it helped create willingly, and that the Democrats didn't put up a fight because this is what the center or the at least the party leadership really wants. What do you say in response to that, looking at the fact pattern I've just laid out?
I don't think that's the case, because I believe Joe Biden is a tactically smart enough president, having lived through the 2020 primary, to see that the country has moved and the Democratic Party has moved. And being in the caucus meeting this morning with the White House and hearing, by the way, not just progressive Democrats, but mainstream Democrats express concerns about some of these cuts, it's obvious to me that the White House understands that they're taking a political hit with key constituencies that they're going to need to win the 2024 election. This is not the 1990s where a triangulation to the responsible center is going to win a presidential election. And Joe Biden's just too good a politician to not realize that. So I think this is more a sense of norm and not wanting to put the 14th Amendment on the table and not wanting to have the Treasury pay because Biden is an institutionalist, probably more so than many progressives, want him to be a little bolder, not be unwilling to have Treasury continue to pay. Now, why we didn't do it in the lame duck, that my sense is that they were so focused on getting the Inflation Reduction Act across the line and making a deal with Manchin on that, that they used their capital there. But I think that's more a tactical mistake. I can't imagine that the White House wanted this result.
Okay, we're going to open it up to questions here. Nick, why don't you explain to folks how they can ask a question?
Yeah, so you're able to raise a hand here, and you'll see it down at the bottom of your screen. So if you have a question, we already got one here, and I'll do my best to keep track of who raises a hand when, so we can do it in order. But yeah, we have Patrick here. I'm gonna allow you to talk, Patrick. So yeah, unmute yourself and chime in.
I just want to thank Khanna for coming on, and I just so appreciate everything you do. I would love your explanation if you could help us understand whether Joe Biden really believes that a general debt ceiling somehow caps his ability to avoid a default. And the reason I asked that question is he did not respond to Larry Tribe, who said in his written New York Times op-ed with Robert Hockett that the general debt ceiling statute doesn't really exist as a limit on the bond authority because the budgets that the Republicans approved set the cap or the ceiling on bond authority. And so paying for what you already approved is baked in to something that the law requires before you ever even get to the 14th Amendment, which, as you say, obviously also authorizes him to issue the bonds. So it didn't seem to make sense to me and lots of other people, unless the political culture has been brainwashed, to say that he's constrained and they have to have a deal or there will be a default. So if you can just walk us through how the grownups in the room and all the inside people talk about this, have they just accepted that there's a need for a debt ceiling, even though you've suspended it, given up the argument, and by this very deal's terms, proven Larry Tribe and Robert Hockett and Larry Summers and Garrett Epps to be right? You've suspended
you're absolutely
it.
right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, basically, Congress ordered the president in previous Congresses to spend this money. The president could just say, "I'm just following Congress's orders." It's not like the president saying, "I want to expand Medicare and I'm going to go spend money on that." All the president's doing is spending money that Congress told him he had to spend. And what would be unconstitutional is if he didn't spend that money. And the Treasury can issue bonds to fulfill his constitutional obligation to do what Congress instructed him to do. And I believe the courts would uphold that. And I believe the courts would view any debt ceiling as a contradiction in trying to abrogate past congressional laws, and would not view that as constitutional. My sense is that the president was told by constitutional advisors around him and by economists around him, don't do that. You may spook the markets. You may cause anxiety, and it's not worth having this thing litigated in court. Yeah, you may win, but you may lose, and let's not take that risk. And that is, by temperament, the president tends to be institutional norm setting, not wanting to take these kind of risks. He's probably concerned about the state of the economy, and that's why he made the decision.
I want to ask, and Patrick, thanks for your question. I want to jump in here and before we get to another question, I want to ask the question about McCarthy. I mean, Speaker Kevin McCarthy is running out there and saying this is the greatest deal for Republican priorities and in the history of the universe, and it's going to cut $2 trillion out of federal spending, and then there are folks like the president saying it's a deal we didn't necessarily really want, but it's not so bad. So just on the spending stuff, let's set aside the Mountain Valley Pipeline stuff for a second. Just on the spending side, McCarthy is saying something that seems diametrically opposite of what the president is saying. So what is the actual truth here?
Well, the truth is that it is only a 2-year deal. That 2 years is a lot for people, but it's a 2-year deal, not a 10-year deal. And the estimates are that it's going to save over 10 years about $800 billion, what I've seen, if we stick to the caps. Anything after 2 years is discretionary, but it's 2 years. And basically it's 2 years capped at 2023 level spending, which is a cut because you have inflation and you're not adjusting for inflation. And so you're going to have a cut in childcare services. You're going to have a cut in helping people with heating bills. You're going to have a cut in housing vouchers for people who need that assistance. You're going to have broad-based cuts. And that's not even counting the work requirements on people who are 50 to 54. So what the president's saying is right in that could have been much worse. They wanted a 10-year freeze But it's still problematic for these 2 years.
Nick, we have another call or another question from the audience.
Yeah, we do. We have James here. James, I'm going to allow you to talk and just unmute yourself once you're able. You should. Yeah, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
Hey, Jamie, how you doing?
Yeah, very well. Nice to see you.
This is an esteemed questioner, Jamie Galbraith, the economist.
Yes. It's a pleasure.
Wow.
We haven't met face to face, Congressman. But,
I know
a great
your
deal
work.
about you. I have 2 points to offer here. One is, and to get your comments on. One is what happens in 2 years. In 2 years, the debt ceiling comes up again, and the negotiations happen again. And there's simply no reason to believe that the precedent set now will be undone. That will simply provide the same leverage and the same, basically the same mechanism to be continued indefinitely, thereby continuing to squeeze the discretionary non-defense part of the budget down to the point where essentially there will be very little left over time. So that's the first concern I have. I don't know any way that can be avoided now that the precedent has been set that you will negotiate the debt ceiling with the basically with the far right of the Republican Party on every occasion. And the second one is this has been, and it's not the first time, one of the greatest snow jobs and scare stories of our time, that what is threatening us is some kind of financial Armageddon. The press has been pumping this up to an amazing degree. Mrs. Clinton in the New York Times said the real winners would be Putin and Xi, at which point one begins to realize that maybe there's a little bit of an exaggeration going on here. That if we went to the point of voting this thing down and didn't have a deal, the Treasury would continue to write checks and the Federal Reserve would have to decide whether to clear them. And if it decided not to clear them, of course, Jamie Dimon would pick up the phone. Congress would be moved to act very quickly. If it decides to clear them, then well, it's taking some steps which might be challenged in court, but they would have more time to deal with it, and the world would continue. So I don't know what the case is for buying into the idea that you're facing a June 5th catastrophe if you turn down this bill.
Well, I appreciate both points. The first point, I think, is a legal question, which I've actually asked experts and waiting for an answer on, and that is, can you challenge the debt ceiling if it's not imminent? I mean, could you challenge it prospectively if the default isn't imminent? Because it would be helpful if we could get a legal ruling that the president can continue to pay debts he's obligated to pay.
Right, but my point, Congressman, is that you don't need to challenge the debt ceiling. The Federal Reserve issues an unsecured line of overnight overdraft line of credit to the Treasury to clear the Treasury general account. If that's not covered by the debt ceiling, the Treasury, the Federal Reserve could decide that that's better than bouncing checks, in which case the world just continues. Okay, there's some maybe flurries in the market. So what? The Federal Reserve affects the markets every time it raises the interest rate.
But could Treasury still continue to write the checks, even if
it has to? It's obliged to by law. It can't stop writing checks, and it has no mechanism to cease. It can't unplug its computers. It makes millions of those payments every single day.
Yeah, no, I thought Yellen was saying that she would have to stop certain payments or something, and maybe that was.
I think I heard her too, and I think she said that they do not have any way to prioritize payments. A good many, and actually Jack Lew said that the last time around as well. They don't have any mechanisms. Their computers are not set up to do that. They can't decide not to. They can't decide to cut your payroll, cut your paycheck, Congressman.
Well, the question, I think, is, it would go to the courts, how the courts would end up resolving it, and my inclination is that they would side with Treasury or the Fed. I think the president probably was just concerned about what this would do with the markets. Maybe it would be temporary. Maybe it's something that
right. That might well be the concern, but my argument would be that being concerned about the markets is one thing, and inflicting serious and ongoing cuts in social programs because you're concerned about the markets is not a good policy, and certainly not a good democratic policy.
I agree with that, and that's why many of us said, let's take it to the courts and have this adjudicated. And that,
bless you, and strength to your arm.
That to me has to be so at some point we've got to do that and get this clarified.
I want to, and Jamie, thanks so much for your comments and your questions. And I should say, thank you so much for your work. Jamie Galbraith, for folks who don't know, is one of the major economists in our country who really talks about these things in a way that they need to be talked about from a kind of non-conservative, non-ideologically right-wing perspective. So thank you so much, Jamie, for your work. I want to move and ask about this question. There's a question in the chat about the Mountain Valley Pipeline. There is an effort to strip out the provision about the Mountain Valley Pipeline. And for those who don't know, the Biden administration and the Republicans in their proposal put in provisions expediting this massive pipeline that goes through West Virginia and Virginia, I think, as well. A set of provisions that were not put into the Inflation Reduction Act. They were kept out of that. That was a big progressive victory in that debate. Now they've shoved it back in here, and they've done so in a way that would prevent judicial review, so not just expediting this pipeline, but also preventing court challenges to it. And there are court challenges to it. And you should check our website, levernews.com. We've got a big story about that and about the campaign contributions that went into some key lawmakers on this. But I guess my question here is, and I asked Senator Chris Murphy this question on our podcast yesterday, and I'll ask you, Ro. There is an effort, or there's been a push to amend it out of the bill. Does that have any kind of legitimate chance of happening? And I should just prospectively say that Senator Murphy said, well, I need to know, he said, I oppose it. I don't want it in there. But he was curious at the time whether that being in there was necessary to get, Joe Manchin's vote or whoever else's vote in order for this debt deal to pass. So all of that's to ask, is there a legitimate chance, and this is a question from Mary Ann, is there a legitimate chance to pass the Tim Kaine amendment or a House amendment to get this pipeline approval nonsense out of this bill?
In the House, there's not a mechanism to do that, given that we don't have the majority or the Rules Committee. In the Senate, I imagine that it will get a vote, but I'd be surprised if you get the 60 votes to overcome the filibuster or whatever is going to be required in the Senate. But the question is, why was this Mountain Valley Pipeline put in there, right? I mean, I don't think this was being motivated by Kevin McCarthy. I don't think that this is something that the Republican House demanded. This was a Joe Manchin thing. And so the administration says, well, we had to make this deal to give Manchin this to get the IRA. Well, look, politicians make a lot of promises. I mean, the president's kept some of them, but no one keeps every single promise. I mean, we haven't expanded Medicare till 60 yet. I mean, I could go down the list of things. We haven't delivered $15 minimum wage yet. Why was there such a demand to keep this particular promise, if made, to Manchin when the IRA is already passed? And my view is that there is all these rumors out there that Joe Manchin may run as a no labels candidate, and knowing the way the Beltway thinks, that this was probably seen as a way to try to keep Manchin out of the race. I mean, and that the people who are paying the price for that are young climate activists. And that's why, this is one of the worst parts of the bill, because it reeks of Washington politics and at the expense of the climate.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to this part, and again, I really hope that everyone listening here and watching will go check out our story about this. I mean, it's not just that this pipeline is being approved, it's that there are these additional provisions that say that the court battles over the pipeline are essentially killed. They're gone. And what's kind of crazy about it, to get your mind around it, is there's been this progressive push, a lot of chatter that Congress should use its authority to challenge the Supreme Court's right to review legislation. That's something that Congress can do. And then all of a sudden, the first thing you see is that the administration is using that power on behalf of the fossil fuel industry, arguably for a favor to Joe Manchin, but for a pipeline in the middle of the climate crisis. I mean, that strikes me as just, I mean, it's an insult, not just an insult to the climate activists, it's an insult to anybody who cares about climate science. And I'm glad that at least some people are trying to stand up and shine a spotlight on this. We're going to see what happens with the Tim Kaine amendment. All right, Nick, do we have anybody else who wants to ask Congressman Ro Khanna a question before we gotta go and he has to vote?
Okay, well, yeah, we've got Pat with their hand up here. Let me let Pat in.
Hey, Pat, can you hear us?
Yeah, unmute. Okay.
Hey, Pat.
Yeah, I didn't have the unmute until after I started talking, so that was kind of funny. But at any rate, I mean, as you look at the whole thing, I can't see that anybody with any sense of ethics or progressive anything would ever vote for this. But what I'm hearing from the squad is really iffy, and it makes me agree more on them being called the so-called progressive caucus. I mean, I'm in Ohio, where we had the problem with Nina Turner not being supported. And I mean, do we really have a progressive caucus in the Congress or not? That's one question. I have another one, but
yeah, Ro, why don't you take that? Why don't you take that?
What is your sense of your fellow so-called progressives?
Ro, why don't you go for it?
Well, I appreciate that. Look, I was proud to have supported Nina Turner, at least in her first race. I think Nina would have been a phenomenal member of Congress, and the way she was attacked was very unfair. Well, the Progressive Caucus is much stronger today than it was 7 years ago. Tonight, actually, will be a pretty good indication of how strong it is. You'll get the scorecard pretty soon about how many of us vote no. I'm hoping it'll be about 50 plus. Let's see. I don't want to embarrass David Sirota, but you know, he was texting a few of us frustrated and saying, look, this is the Progressive Caucus's moment. If you're not going to stand up for cuts to poor people's food stamps at a time of an affordability crisis, what good are you? And certainly had an impact on me. I think I shared it with a number of others. It's had an impact. So, you know, outside voices do matter. And I think you're going to be proud of some of us who stand up. Now, it's not going to be 100 progressive members, and that's why we got to continue to fight. We've got to continue to elect more progressives. We got to finally elect progressives as the nominee. You know, I was in one of those funks after David was just saying, well, what all we've done, it's not coming to anything. And I went back and I started looking at the Bernie Sanders campaign, because I spent, like David and some of the folks probably on this call, heart and soul into it. And I looked after we won Nevada, I looked at one of Nate Silver's articles, 70% that Bernie Sanders was going to win a majority outright of delegates to be the Democratic Party nominee. And the reason I remind people of that is he came so close. And we've got to remind people that he came so close, running unambiguously on getting big money out of politics, on Medicare for all, on free public college, or standing for working class people. And that is what a lot of people in this country still want. And so I don't think it's actually that courageous for the Progressive Caucus to be standing up for these things. It's just reminding people that that's where a lot of the grassroots are. But you'll get a clear scorecard tonight.
All right. The last question I want to, and I should say, I plead guilty to everything Ro Khanna just said. I did text Ro in I was kind of morose when he and I were texting yesterday or the day before about, again, what is the point of a progressive caucus? And I should add, I said that as somebody who I worked for Bernie Sanders. I first worked for him in 1999, which was really only a few years after the Progressive Caucus had ever existed. And I remember how small it was, and I remember how powerless it felt. And so I texted you, Ro, those morose thoughts, or at least those despondent thoughts, remembering what it was set up to do. And I hope that we are going to see a strong vote from the Progressive Caucus, because I think it's important to show people that there are some folks in the Democratic Party who really understand what this is about. I do think there is a crisis of confidence that anybody there in either party is really serious about what they say they are serious about. I think that level of demoralization is a key part of a big problem for the Democratic Party, for the progressive movement heading into the 2024 election. Okay, speaking of the 2024 election, that's a good place to end this conversation, because I want to ask one other question that came in on the chat, which is, how do you think this deal will affect the country's view of the right-wing Republicans, or the Republican Party writ large, in subsequent elections? I mean, do you think people will remember this? Do you think it's going to be I kind of think sometimes we live in a goldfish culture where everyone forgets their entire world every 15 minutes. I mean, Kevin McCarthy is going to run out and say this is a big victory for, fiscal responsibility. I mean, do you think what's going to happen tonight has any implications for the Republicans moving forward?
I think the Republicans are going to pay a price if the Democrats prosecute the case. And this is why this can't be seen as a bipartisan deal. I mean, if this looks as Joe Biden and Kevin McCarthy came to an agreement and both sides compromised, for almost normalizing something that is going to hurt people, and that's going to hurt people at a time where the economy is slowing. I think what it's got to look like is the Republicans held us hostage. In my view, I think the Democrats should vote no in mass numbers, make the Republicans own the votes on this, say that Biden did whatever he could because he was under basically gunpoint of the Republicans. And now we're going to really fight for democratic values. So the key to making this a albatross on the Republicans is to make this a Republican bill and not a bipartisan bill, because it is a Republican framing. And again, to me, the central point of why this is a center-right bill is you've got defense going up and social spending being cut. And that was not the deal even 10 years ago. Now, it's less harmful in the cuts, but that framing is straight out of Ronald Reagan.
Congressman Ro Khanna, as always, thank you so much for taking time today. We really appreciate it. I want to thank everybody here who is joining us, all of our subscribers at The Lever. You make this possible, and we really appreciate your support. We really appreciate you spreading the word about The Lever, and we will continue to report on this. Look in your email box tomorrow morning. We've got and it's on our website right now, a big story about the Mountain Valley Pipeline, the campaign contributions that have come in. Ro Khanna, keep us posted on what happens. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Lever, for all the reporting you've been doing.
Thanks so much.